Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute. Today, I am joined by Professor of Economics at George Mason University and New York Times bestselling author, Dr. Bryan Caplan. His new book is titled Pro-Market and Pro-Business, Essays on Laissez-Faire. Dr. Caplan, where's the best place for people to get the book?
The best and only place is Amazon.
On page 148, you said, on the free market, firms strive to satisfy the customer and constantly look for new and improved ways of doing business. Why would this be? It seems like businesses could just be out for their bottom line. They're self-interested. What reason do you have to believe businesses are out to please customers?
Because the way you make money is by pleasing customers, of course. If you just look at any business, if customers aren't happy, then they are not going to be getting people coming in and buying stuff. I mean, obviously, if you're a waiter, what do you do in order to make as much money as possible? Make your customers really happy with the experience. This is the most basic way that markets work. It's one where it's almost hard to imagine what the other story really is. If you were running a business, would you say, all right, I want to go and make the customers unhappy? Of course not. The customer is always right. It's a classic slogan, and it really does capture so much of what's going on.
You mention that you have a remedy to the current healthcare crisis. You say, let me be clear. In my ideal world, we wouldn't just abolish Obamacare. We'd abolish Medicare, Medicaid, regulation of health insurance, medical licensing, and the Food and Drug Administration. Why would ending those programs increase healthcare access to people with low incomes?
Well, just to start, not all of those are designed to increase access, because that is not a reasonable goal for a system to have maximum access. If you want maximum access, then a system where government just spends an enormous amount of money on subsidies is the correct system. The key point is that means that you're sacrificing a lot of other stuff in order to get a marginal amount of additional medicine. And as I believe I say in this book, there is a great slogan, actions speak louder than words. If people are not willing to spend much of their own money on medical care, that is a sign that they don't appreciate it very much. So I would just start by challenging the goal of maximizing access and say, no, the right goal of the health system is getting a reasonable amount of healthcare at a reasonable cost, not getting the maximum amount in order to go and max out possible gains for health. Now, that said, some of those things are definitely increasing access. So medical licensing is famously a set of regulation that reduces the supply of healthcare. Without that, it would be possible for many additional people to provide it. The usual reaction is, my God, you're going to have a bunch of horrible quacks. And the right reaction, though, is, no, it means, again, that we're going to have a range of qualities based upon the actual value that customers have and the availability of supply. So for brain surgery, yeah, you want people who have many, many years of practice before you're going to hire them. On the other hand, for basic treatment of acne, you don't really need a medical degree for that. Nurse practitioner is totally fine. And yet the system is designed to require that you need to have the highest credential to do almost any kind of medical procedure. In terms of the demand-related things, there, like I said, the real sensible goal is figuring out the right trade-off, not if it saves one life, we should do it, even if it costs $1 trillion, but instead weighing how much extra healthcare do we actually get for the additional expense. And that is a place where it's much better for customers to be calling the shots than government.
You mentioned that there are a number of lessons you extracted from Frederick Bastiat, a philosopher from the 1850s.
Usually called an economist, but yes, it's not wrong to call him a philosopher too.
Oh, yeah, I must have written that down incorrectly. What were some of the great intellectual contributions of Frederick Bastiat, and what can we extract for the present day?
Probably his biggest idea, it comes from an essay called What is Seen and What is Not Seen. And in this essay, he says, look, if you're going to go and judge any economic policy, it's not enough just to go and look at the visible consequences of the policy. You also have to think of what could have happened instead. What could have happened instead? So he has this famous example involving a broken window. Child picks up a rock, throws it through a window. Everyone's getting ready to say bad child. And then someone says, oh, no, this is actually good because the owner of that store is going to need to buy a new glass window, which is good for the glass maker. And the owner and the guy who makes the windows, he'll have more money. He'll go and buy some new socks. And so it's good for the sock maker. And then the sock maker will go and take that money and he'll buy it on yet something else. And so on. So there's an infinite benefit created indirectly by this child's seemingly inappropriate act of vandalism. And what Bastiat said is, well, you have to ask, what would the store owner have done with the money instead? So maybe he would have gone on a vacation, and then the people that own the hotel would have gotten some money, and then their workers would have gotten some money, and so on. And he says the real difference between the two scenarios is exactly that in the first scenario, a window got destroyed, and in the second one, it didn't. And then he applies this to so many other examples. He has one of, suppose that we're in peacetime, we got no enemies. Someone says, let's go and shrink the army by 100,000 men. And then people say, no, but the military base and the surrounding community will suffer. And then all of the customers who were in the bars where the soldiers went and spent their money will suffer, and so on. So no, you should never close a base, even though it appears to the naive to have no social function. And Bastiat's answer is, you need to consider what you could have done with that money instead. You could have let the taxpayers keep their money, and then they would be generating this giant ripple effect of benefits. Or even the government could have spent it on something that had created value, could have made a railroad with it, and then there would have been an endless stream of benefits from that. So that is something that Bastiat says, which pretty much is impossible to deny once you hear it. And yet a lot of government policy is based upon the opposite idea of only looking at these immediate benefits. The classic one is after a hurricane, then you'll have a bunch of people on the news saying, well, this is going to be good for the economy. Yeah. It's like, it's good for the economy that we destroyed a bunch of stuff. Or one of the funnest is actually back in the 80s, there was all of this talk of, well, Japan was so lucky to get bombed into the Stone Age in World War II because then they rebuilt all the factories in a very modern way. And the reply to that, which Bastiat would have approved of, is, well, in that case, why don't we just blow up our factories?
Yeah.
Right? There's a reason you keep using obsolete factories, which is that they still have value and it's not yet profitable to actually do a full tear down and rebuild. And when it is profitable, that and only then is it a good idea to go forward.
I had a modern monetary theorist on the show, Stephen Grumbine,
really?
who says that, yes, that is something that would apply to you, Bryan Caplan, and your family.
Mm-hmm.
If you spend time on something, that's time you're not spending on something else. If
Mm-hmm.
you spend dollars on something,
Mm-hmm.
that's dollars that are allocated away from other endeavors. However, the government is different because they have access to a printing press and they can
of course.
money supply to pay for these things. So therefore, Bastiat's analogy is invalid. How do you respond?
Right. This is one where, like, honestly, I've only met a very small number of modern monetary theorists, so-called. I don't know what's so modern about it. But anyway, the main reductio ad absurdum is, okay, then why not print $1 billion and give it to every person, and then everyone can be a billionaire? And I assume the response is, no, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. But in that case, I'll say this is no different from the standard old-fashioned macroeconomics that says when there are unemployed resources and you've got a failure of wage and price flexibility, then you might be able to get a short-run increase in production at no one's expense by printing a little extra money to trick people, essentially. And really in the story, what's going on is that printing a little extra money can be a way of covertly reducing the actual real wages of workers and thereby employing them. But again, like, the idea this is some grand theory of the world is totally wrong. Rather, it is at most a very minor exception to the rule, which only applies in certain very special circumstances, combined obviously with the massive risk that once you start having the government print money to go and solve problems of unemployed resources, you are likely to wind up just going down the route to insane hyperinflation. So yes, I'm just amazed these people will even show their faces in public. I have one very good and smart friend who really was sucked in by this. And when I said, okay, so could we just get rid of all taxes and fund it purely by, and then fund government purely by printing money and also have no inflation? And he's like, yeah, totally. And I'm like, all right, like if that's what you think, you're just so out of your mind. I don't know what to say next.
What do you think Frederick Bastiat would say? What is an analogy you think he would give when talking to the protectionists of
Hmm.
today? I'm trying to think of what reductio ad absurdum he would come up with. What do you think comes
Mhm.
to mind?
I mean, we don't need to speculate because he's got a many different arguments that he made to try to persuade very stubborn protectionists, but probably this one is the best. So, like, look, suppose that the rest of the world just produced stuff and then they shoved it out in the ocean and then it washed up on our shore for free. Should we turn it down? Right? It's like, no. It's like, so we shouldn't turn down like endless free stuff from other countries. No. Well, cheap is the next best thing to free. So to complain about cheap imports is one step away from complaining about getting endless gifts. And one was like, what else? What do you say about it? The only real story is, this is part of a very clever and intelligent plan they have. Step one, give us a pile of free stuff. Step two, destroy our domestic industry. Step three, jack up the price and then make their money. It's like, that sounds like a good plan to you? That sounds like a terrible plan, actually. People just go and take all the free stuff while it's free, stockpile it even in case of any emergencies. And then if you try raising the price, they could go live off the stockpiles. Or again, finally, there's a brief period of disruption and then the native industries revive. Why wouldn't they? It's not like the people that know how to run the businesses have disappeared. If your plan is we're going to go and give free stuff away for 100 years and they'll lose all knowledge, it's like, yeah, that sounds like a really stupid plan to lose money for 100 years so that later on you can go and rip them off. Not an actual plausible plan. This is really just the international version of what's called predatory pricing, which many people do think, it's just such a great strategy. Just sell at a loss, just destroy all your competitors, and then jack up the price. It's like, do you know how many things can go wrong with that strategy? If you were running a business, would you really try that? Sounds moronic.
You mentioned on page 7, always keep your eye on production. This is not what I usually hear. I usually hear about keep your eye on the unemployment rate, keep your
Mhm.
eye on the trade deficit. Why should we always keep our
Mhm.
eye on production?
Right. Well, unemployment at least is related to production. So that one's not so dumb, but trade deficit is real dumb. I mean, here's the key thing: economics is complicated. Anyone who tells you otherwise is just trying to trick you. But, and what's so complicated about it? It's like, because something that seems really awesome will always have some negative side effects. The internet has a bunch of negative side effects. Allowing Expedia to come into existence destroyed probably tens of thousands of travel agencies. So then, for any piece of progress, or like, I imagine someone comes up with a pill that makes people immortal, right? That's going to be bad for morticians. It's going to go and cause problems with Social Security, on and on. So, for anything that happens in the economy, no matter how seemingly awesome, if you think about it for a few more seconds, you can always find some downsides. And then the question is, so then does that mean that it's impossible to assess the overall benefits of anything? And that's where I say no. With the aid of this maxim, always keep your eye on production is not, because the ultimate fact is that societies, or as I put it, the secret of mass consumption is mass production, with basically no exceptions. Societies that produce a lot have high living standards. Societies that produce little have low living standards. So I say that's what you should always focus on for any policy. Is this increasing total production? If so, good idea. Go move ahead. Is it reducing total production? If so, bad idea. Don't do that thing. And that's where I say, like you applying this principle, you really can cut through a lot of the complexity and realize that it is not that hard to figure out what is economically good and what is economically bad. So, someone says, well, unions are good for the workers, but bad for the rest of society. Yes. Well, what do unions do? Yeah, they try to reduce production. Okay, well, then bad, for example.
I could see someone hearing that and saying, all right, I keep my eyes on production only.
Mhm.
And the US is not producing like it used to. It's doing more
Mhm.
consumption. China's the one doing the producing. Therefore, we should have more restrictions and we should be producing more and focusing less on consumption. What, if
Right.
anything?
If a person like that is like, let's just go and look at the numbers. You are wrong. Total U.S. manufacturing output is currently near an all-time high. It is way higher than when the U.S. normalized trade relations with China. So the facts are just not what people imagine. It really, what's going on is what international trade economists have been saying for centuries, which is that we produce a lot of stuff, we trade it, and then in exchange we get other stuff. Uh, the let's see. So now something else that's totally worth pointing out is most imports that we buy are actually not for consumption anyway. Most imports are inputs into production. So it's something like 60% of all the imports that we make by value are actually used for productive purposes. So it's even crazier than the person says. Now, in terms of what the trade deficit is, this is something where actual understanding of what it even means is very low. But so actually, why don't I walk this through you, Keith, and let's see how we can do. All right. So the first question is, like, how is a trade deficit even possible? How is it possible for us to go and buy more stuff from the world than they buy from us? Where does the difference even come from? You feel like you got a good understanding of that, Keith?
Where does the difference?
Yeah, so if we buy $100 billion, or we buy $100 billion of stuff from the world and they only buy $90 billion of stuff from us, how do we even make up that $10 billion difference? Where does that come from?
It's traded off by the products that we've consumed. So the example I could use is I have spent quite a bit of money on these books that are an excellent deal on Amazon. And I don't believe you have ever been a customer at the business I work at in Arizona. So we have a huge trade deficit.
Okay, so I'll stop you there. So that sounds really good, except the whole point of a trade deficit is that if you sum all of the current production that we have bought from you and compare it to all of our current production the world has bought from us, there's still actually a gap. So while your answer is good, it's not correct. In fact, there's so like, because at the level of the world, this means that there's actually a difference between the value of all of our current production we're selling to the world and all the current production that they're selling to us. So it's not right, actually.
It's not right that the difference is just made up in the value of the goods that I've
So
produced.
yeah, the trade deficit really is a way of comparing the difference of two value of goods. So the real answer, which again, like a lot of people who even teach the material, I think, are hazy on, is that we make up the difference with asset sales. Because remember how GDP is current production of final goods and services in the current year? Right. So the way that you get a trade deficit, actually, that partly part of what you're doing is you are paying for imports with with assets, not with current production. So you remember how, like, a house produced last year, if you sell it, that's not GDP, right? Right.
Yeah.
So then what's going on? Well, the simplest way to have a trade deficit is if we go and just reduce our cash balances, right? Because the cash you have in your wallet, that's not GDP, right? A piece of paper isn't GDP, it's an asset. So it is one thing that we can do is we can buy more than we produce by running down our stock of dollars, which is actually a way that you could have bought my book, Keith. You could have been unemployed, produced nothing this year, but if you had some savings, you could have still bought the book, right?
Correct.
So that is the simplest version of a trade deficit, actually, is just running down a previously earned stack of dollars. And if that's all that's going on, then your MMT person has something worth listening to, which is, could we just print trillions of dollars and then buy stuff from foreigners and have them just sit on our dollars? And the answer is maybe, because the dollar is actually valued all over the world, and there's a lot of countries where their local money is crummy, and so they want dollars, and they will actually sell us their current GDP just to get a stack of green paper money. Right now, that is not the way that trade deficits usually work. Usually the assets that we're selling are like bonds or stocks or real estate. And that's where you can't just go and print more of that without any consequence. But there is actually, even here, a lot of very good economists say, yeah, well, trade deficits basically represent us running down our savings. It's kind of like we're retirees and we are living off of savings. And that is one way to have a trade deficit, which makes even some reasonable people say, well, we should be a little nervous about going and running down our savings so much. But as my colleague Don Boudreau points out, there's actually a totally different way that doesn't for it to run trade deficits forever, that doesn't involve running down your savings. Like, what would that be? That would be foreign investment in your country. Foreign investment in your country. So if foreigners come and they buy an abandoned factory, we are selling them an asset, but it doesn't mean that we're poorer because we sold an abandoned factory. It's actually the next step towards producing a lot more stuff. And then just to give more further credit to John Boudreau, he then goes to the question of, well, so which story fits the facts better? Because if we were really running down our savings for every year that we run a trade deficit, our net worth should have gone down, right? And guess what's happened to Americans' net worth over the last 40 years? Yeah, more than doubled. More than doubled. So totally consistent with a story where just like there's an enormous number of workers who want to move to the United States because our economy is so good, there's also an enormous number of investors in the world that want to go and move to our country, move their assets to our country because our country is so good. And the only way that can work in terms of basic accounting is if they don't buy as much of our current GDP as we sell them, because they need to have some left over to go and buy our old factories or buy buy land or whatever. So that's what's really going on with trade deficits. Very poorly understood, but even by people like you, Keith, who have a good understanding overall. But it's so different from what most people think of that it's like, how long have I been talking about this? Like 5-10 minutes already, right? And imagine trying to get that time in a debate for the presidency and see how well you do with that.
On page 113, you mention public choice theory. What is this, and what is something we could apply it to in the present?
Great. So public choice theory is just the economics of politics, using economics to understand why politics works the way that it does. The classic example is what's called the median voter model. And it just says, well, imagine that you're a politician and you're competing for power. And what are you going to do in order to win? And the median voter answer is you're going to try to moderate, move to the center in order to go and scoop up undecided voters. And therefore, what normally happens in democracy is both sides move to the center. So that's one example. But a deeper point, I think this is from an essay called Public Choice, the Normative Core. The deeper idea of public choice is when you're trying to predict what government will do, you shouldn't just assume that government will do whatever economists think that it should do, right? Instead, you should go and look at the incentives of people running the government. For example, once you've shown that free trade actually is the best trade policy, it does not follow politicians will push free trade. Instead, they're going to push what's popular. So if most people don't believe in that stuff, they're going to go and push for policies that are wealth destroying, but nevertheless are believed to be good by typical voters in the center. More general idea, there really has long been an idea of economics of, well, here we've shown the theory of market failure. This is what would be how government can improve markets. And that's why governments do what they do. And that last step is just so boneheaded. It's like, all right, well, why don't we look at the real world and see whether governments are actually doing that? A classic example, in every econ textbook, it will say governments should subsidize things with positive externalities and tax things with negative externalities. Basically, things that have positive side effects for strangers the market ignores. Then government will improve the market performance by subsidizing those things. If there are things that people in markets are doing, like pollution, that are harming bystanders, then tax that. Those are negative externalities. All right. Now, all fine, according to me, but that doesn't show that's what governments really do. And of course, just look at the real world. Like, is there any government on earth where all they do about pollution is impose a tax on it and then say, we're done, pollute as much as you want as long as you pay the tax? No, there are zero such countries, right? Or one that I recently wrote a whole book on, housing. The governments all over the world effectively tax housing. They make it hard to build. You've got to get a lot of permission, lots of rules, lots of things that raise costs. this would at least not be totally against the textbook if housing were on balance a bad thing, right? In particular, if the negatives of housing exceeded the positives, and yet there is overwhelming evidence that on balance, housing is a good thing. How do we know this? Well, if you live in a big city and you've got all the classic problems of living in a big city, so you got parking problems, congestion, noise, there is actually a really easy thing that you could do, especially in Arizona, Keith, to get rid of all traffic, all parking, and all noise problems. Can you think about what you might do if you never wanted to have any of those problems again while remaining in the state of Arizona, Keith?
Elect Fauci as president and have lockdowns.
Something much easier, something you personally can do, Keith. You can do it today if you want to.
I could move to Antarctica.
Yes.
Yeah.
Move to one of those incredibly empty places in Arizona. Like you drive from Phoenix to Sedona and it's like, wow, there's hardly anybody in this state.
Yeah.
You won't have any traffic problems. You'll have no parking problems, no noise problems. But what do you lose when you move into the middle of nowhere in Arizona?
Access to in and out.
Yes,
Yeah.
you lose job opportunities. You lose you lose consumer opportunities. You lose cultural opportunities. You lose social opportunities. And what does this mean? It means that people will happily pay a lot of extra money to live in the places that are full of traffic and parking and noise problems, because those negatives of living near other people come packaged with a bunch of other positives. Actions speak louder than words. People are willing to pay a large upcharge for the package of all positives and all negatives of living near other people, which shows housing actually on balance has positive externalities. So if governments were following the textbooks, they wouldn't be trying to stop construction. They would be subsidizing it. They'd be encouraging it, rolling out the red carpet. Oh, you want to build something great? How can we be of assistance? Which is not the way actually how actual housing policy works. Quite the opposite.
And does public
and by the way, and why? Because normal voters don't agree with this stuff. Normal voters do think of housing as having a bunch of negatives, and they want government to protect them from the negatives, and they don't appreciate the positives barely at all. Right? So the normal human reaction is, oh, it's bad. They're building stuff. It's going to cause a bunch of problems. Oh, positives? What positives? Come on, it's not positives. And that, though wrong, is popular. And so governments pander to that kind of economic illiteracy.
Do you think gross domestic product is the best way to quickly measure economic growth? I know you say keep your eyes on production. Is there a
Yes.
production metric that we could focus on instead? Is there a number that we can use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So since you put on the word quickly, if quickly includes the time to explain a different number, then I'd have to say GDP is the best way to do it quickly, because otherwise I'd have to say, okay, you've heard of GDP, right? Right. Okay, well, there's a bunch of problems with GDP. Let me explain them to you. Okay. All right. Now, after we go make these adjustments, let's go and look at these new numbers. All right. So that's not quick. You're taxing people's patience. But yes, there's a bunch of problems with GDP. The most obvious one is a lot of stuff in the G based upon the actual conceptual idea of GDP shouldn't be included, because GDP is supposed to be final goods and services only, things that people directly enjoy consuming. And yet that when the government goes and spends money on missiles, that counts. It's like whatever you think about foreign policy, people are not going and like stroking the missiles and saying, good missile, I love you. Whatever the point is, though, the point is to go and allow the rest of the economy to work. So just based upon this logic of don't count intermediate goods, you shouldn't be counting national defense, shouldn't be counting police. And then things like, well, what about roads? Well, you should count it if it's roads for consumption purposes. So it should be counted in GDP if you are driving to go and see your friends, but you shouldn't be counting it if you're driving a truck to go and move inputs from one place to another, because that's double counting, because we already counted whatever the final value of, say, the Frisbees is. And then we are also going and counting the trucks separately, and we're not supposed to count the trucks separately. That would be like counting both the Frisbees and the Frisbee workers as two different final goods, and the Frisbee workers aren't final goods. So that's one really big problem with GDP. Another big problem with GDP is it doesn't count leisure, right? So Another one that is officially it should be counted, but it's just that by definition the data doesn't know about it. Black markets, illegal production should be counted, but by definition, almost illegal production isn't measured by the government. If the government could measure illegal production, they would stop it probably. So those are some other problems. Let's see. So yeah, look, that's just the beginning, and then if you wanted to go and do like final well-being, then you might say we should do some subtractions for crime or things like that. So yeah, we could improve the numbers a lot. That said, GDP does correlate, or GDP per capita correlates really well with almost anything people care about. So it's a very useful number. And if you just want to talk quickly to people, it is the best way to talk about production, probably.
What do you think about Marion Tupy using a time price graph to measure? So he doesn't even really explain each thing individually when he's
Mhm.
making a pitch to, I think, Prager University. He
Mhm.
did this with. He
Mhm.
said, look at this graph, and it's a line that really just goes
Mhm.
down, a bunch
Mhm.
of lines that go down and say, all of these products take less work to accumulate than they did in previous generations. This is how we measure wealth. What do you think about time price?
Yeah, so it's totally reasonable. It's not a good measure of total production,
Mm.
but it's a good measure of living standards, definitely. Even there, both GDP, this is something else I totally should have mentioned, GDP and time price, both of these generally neglect the quality of products. So if the quality of products is improving, if you say, well, it now costs only 2 minutes to buy an ear of corn, it's like, all right, well, maybe the corn today is better than the corn of 100 years ago. And that's almost certainly true, actually. If you just go and take a look at like chickens or anything that we can breed has gotten better over time, for example. And then obviously consumer electronics have gotten better. So yeah, what Marion is doing is great. And if you say, well, now it only costs like 3 hours of work to buy a television, it's all right. Yeah, but that's an understatement because the televisions you're buying today are so much better than televisions that you would have bought in 1970. So even there, it's misleadingly pessimistic.
Mm, good point. I've noticed that a lot of discussions between people are hard to really unify. It seems like
Or hard to do, hard to whatify,
it's hard to unify people
unify.
on certain topics, and I'm trying to get to what the root of this is. It seems like there's a difference between people who believe humans are inherently self-interested
Hmm.
and people who think that that is just the result of the current capitalist culture
Uh-huh.
that makes us self-interested. So I could see a lot of people that I would hang around say
Hmm.
that the reason business is bad is because it's you saying, out of all the possibilities of the personality that I could have,
Hmm.
I'm choosing to be a self-interested profit seeker
Hmm.
instead of care about the masses. Do you think a disagreement on self-interest is why so many people vilify businesses? Is there something
Hmm.
else?
Hmm. So great question. There's one sense in which that's totally wrong. If you thought that human beings were unselfish, then you'd figure that business people would be very generous and would be and be extra concerned with making sure that consumers are happy. So, like, if you really believe that people were fundamentally unselfish, then again, you really shouldn't be worried about business. It's just like a nice person. Jason Brennan has this long discussion of I think it's the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse show his kids were watching, and it's a totally capitalist world where the characters run businesses, but they're also super nice Disney characters. And he says, yeah, like that's totally consistent with capitalism too. So I'd say that normally critics of the market don't actually believe that people are in fact quite selfish. That's a little different from your question is like, is it caused by capitalism or is that actually just human nature? And that's a more sensible complaint because you say, well, look, selfishness is bad, but the reason people are selfish is because we live in this society where we have free markets. And that's one where there's two routes I would do. One is just the Darwinian route is human beings are mammals, we're primates. Show me any other mammal, any other primate that is fundamentally unselfish in dealings with total strangers. I mean, obviously, we're evolved to care about our descendants, blood relatives, allies, and human beings do that. So, not true that most people are selfish through and through. In that case, you'd say, "Oh, the kid's not going to do anything for me, so I don't. Who cares if he's my son?" Uh, But anyway, so I would just start with evolution and say, look, why on earth would you think this is something very specific to a one economic system rather than that human beings are animals and we're like other animals, especially like similar animals. We're like chimpanzees. See chimpanzees going and primarily just giving stuff away to others, chimps and other bands of chimps. No, you don't. All right, so that's one route I would take. The other one is I'd say, all right, so let's take a look at socialist countries and see how selfish people were there. And yeah, so Soviet Union, no one is ever there claimed that they were living an unselfish life, except totally brainwashed fools. After the collapse, that was totally clear. You see people in the Communist Party living high off of the regular common worker. I think the idea Marx had is, all right, well, look, obviously there's going to be a few generations where the attitudes of capitalism continue and we're not going to be unselfish. But once it lasts long enough, then we'll change. And that's where it's like, all right, so you claim something that totally goes against evolution, that contradicts all the actual experience we've had, but you're assuring us that in 100 years that's going to change. That's ridiculous. No sensible person would believe you on that. Or, why don't we just go and look at people who live on communes? And you'll see, yeah, people in communes, a lot of complaining about free riding and other selfish behavior. So overall, it's just a very silly view.
On page 57, you say, a good economist really can talk more intelligently about many topics he's never specifically studied than most non-economists who work on those topics full time. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think you're about my dad. So my dad was someone who worked in the defense industry. And when you talked about any other business that in the world, you say they're all colluding with each other, like they're in the back room setting prices, they're doing predatory pricing, driving the small fry out of business. There's one industry that he thought was ultra competitive, and that was defense contracting, which is one of the most notorious for collusion, especially. And this is one where it's like, well, I think what's going on is my dad actually did have good firsthand experience with one industry, his own. And so on that, I actually would tend to trust what he said. But yeah, on everything else, he didn't know what he's talking about. And then finally, what is the economist doing? Connecting the dots and saying, look, the one industry you know something about is the one where you think that it works the way that I say all these other ones or the normal industries work like. Why do you think that you have figured out what's really going on in every other industry? Isn't it much more likely that industries generally work the way that you do, where people in the industry feel like they're under a lot of stress to go and stay in business?
Yes, that makes a lot more sense. You mention on page 54, if you read an introductory economics text, virtually none of the content is based on experiments. Instead, good economic texts are packed with truisms based on claim observations of humanity. For example, incentives change behavior. Let's start with that one. Why is that important? And what are the implications of incentives change behavior?
All right. Just to back up, I think that's in the chapter on econ as anatomy. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So the whole idea of this essay is to go and draw an analogy. So in any science class, they go and tell you, the scientific method, first form a hypothesis, then collect data, then test it, and then if necessary, go and revise the hypothesis. All right. That is not the way that we get anatomical knowledge generally. So it's not like the way that people found out that the heart pumps blood is by going and randomly either disabling hearts or not, and then seeing whether the blood stops pumping. Right. And honestly, if you were doing that, you could just as well have said, look, the brain pumps blood because we cut off your head, your blood stops pumping too. Right. Instead, what they did is just careful observation. Right. So let's go and see what is this thing? It's the heart. There's the blood. There it is. That's the way that we get anatomical knowledge. And I say economics is very much the same way. So it's not, most of it is not based on experiments at all. It's just based upon just opening up your eyes and paying attention and saying, well, look, why are these people showing up for work? Well, they go there, they get money. Suppose you tried running a business where you didn't pay your workers. How many workers are you going to get? If you're running a charity, maybe a few, but if you're running a restaurant and you say, here, we just don't pay people here, we just ask for volunteers, you're not going to get them. That's not based on an experiment. It's based upon just looking at the world, paying attention, and very carefully saying something that in a sense is obvious and yet before economics is around, it was very rarely said.
I think that's so important because a lot of discussions that I hear act as though there is not really a difference in incentives faced by people in the voluntary sector or people
Mhm,
in the coercive sector. So I think it's very valuable.
mhm,
But when I bring it up, people say, "Oh, that's obvious." Yeah, politicians want votes too, so there's incentives in both, and
mhm.
they
Yeah,
can.
no, like, so that, it's definitely true that politicians have incentives to try to, win voters over. Uh, what I repeatedly say is, people's political thought is so dogmatic, so religious, so illogical that when you compete for the support of people like that, you wind up saying a bunch of ridiculous things, and if you keep your promises, you wind up doing a bunch of ridiculous things. Uh, I will say, so like, what about the incentives of voters? That's what I'll say. Yeah, like, you can vote for anything, and the same thing happens to you. So it's not anywhere remotely like shopping. So if you go shopping and you buy a bunch of stuff that doesn't work and is overpriced, you lose a pile of money and aren't happy. But if you go and vote for a pile of stuff that doesn't work and is overpriced, what happens to you? The same thing would have happened to you if you voted perfectly, because you're just one little person.
Interesting difference. Trade is mutually beneficial was the second one.
Mhm.
We've gone over that. Supply slopes up. Is that necessarily connected to demand slopes down, or what is
Mhm.
supply slopes up? What are the
Right. So,
lessons?
these are two totally separate forces. So, supply shows how much people want to go and produce at given prices. Demand shows how much people want to buy at given prices. Basic econ is, as price goes up, people want to buy less but want to produce more. And that's basically how markets work. Is if you go and say have a maximum price for things, then this reduces the amount of stuff that people want to produce, while of course increasing the amount of stuff that people want to consume. And that, students, is how we get a shortage of something where at the market price the shelves are empty. Right? You might remember toilet paper during COVID. What was going wrong? At the market price, people wanted to buy more than people wanted to produce.
Excess supply leads to surpluses. Is that just inherently true, or is there a lesson to be extracted from that?
So let's see. In a sense, that's hmm, let's see. So I mean, that I say that's basically true. True by definition. But so excess supply just means that the quantity people want to supply at a price exceeds the quantity people want to demand at that price. Uh, if it's excessively high prices cause surpluses, that is the better way of putting it. Because the idea is, look, there's a price so high. If you get the price of anything high enough, people won't want to buy it anymore. But people would really love to sell it at that high price. So if that book that you just held up, could you hold it up again?
Absolutely.
Yes. So if the market price of that were $1 million a copy, I would be producing a lot more of those books. However, at $1 million a copy, I don't think even as big a fan as you, Keith, would buy the book. So that's an example of a surplus where I would want to produce a lot more than people want to buy.
I'd have to get the PDF offline. Very sorry. At $1 million, I just can't do it. You had a discussion with a chief executive officer of a binding arbitration
Hmm,
organization.
yeah.
What were some of the lessons you either learned from that, or what are some
Hmm.
things we could understand about binding arbitration?
Right. So this is 32 years ago. Wow. Anyway, so yeah, the summer before grad school, I was doing a paper on arbitration, and so I talked to the guy who was the CEO of an arbitration firm, and I started asking him some questions that made him feel very uncomfortable. So I was saying, so like, what if someone was to use binding arbitration to, for example, pay workers less than minimum wage, and then the contract says the arbitrator is going to be my brother? Isn't this a way that you could get around basically any labor regulation? And he clearly was nervous about talking about it because it's like, well, and he said something that's like, well, if you don't like it, don't sign. It's like, great, that's fine with me. But of course, someone that likes these regulations isn't going to be happy because, yes, strictly enforced binding arbitration is a highly effective way to get around any regulation that with anyone that you can get to sign a contract. I say this is actually a very strong sign that the regulation is a bad idea, right? Because if someone is happy to go and write a contract saying in exchange for somewhat higher wages, I will give up this benefit the government said that I have to have. Well, if people want to do that, it shows the benefit is worth less than it costs the business. So really simple example, if there's a regulation saying every worker has to get season tickets to the opera. All right, well, if people can bargain around this and say, tell you what, you give me a $200 raise and I won't require the opera tickets, which cost like $2,000. That is a totally reasonable deal. And the fact that people want to make that deal shows how stupid the original opera regulation was. And I say the same goes for any kind of mandated benefit, the right to sue your employer in case of discrimination. The fact that people would likely sell this right for a modest price to a business that would be really glad to go and get protection against getting sued shows that the losses to the business are greater than the gains to the worker. And therefore, it is actually a regulation that makes the market worse. If you just think about like how much of a raise would an employer have to offer you to waive your right to sue? It's like, yeah, not much. Yeah, but on the other hand, why are they so eager to do it? Because it's really bad to get sued.
Mm. You mentioned, last question. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Keith. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Keith.
Thank you. You mention a number of businesses that offer a lot of free and low cost products. You mentioned Google, Amazon, Facebook, YouTube. I think you mentioned Netflix. It's
Netflix
just
is not
kind
free,
of
but yeah.
it's just kind of amazing that there's so many low cost options available, yet there's still anti-market bias. Why do
Yes.
you think such a thing exists?
Yeah. I've been an economist for like 10, 15 years. And I said, look, I heard a lot of complaining about monopoly, but in the early 2000s, my reaction is, look, no one could get mad at Google. How
Mhm.
can you get mad at a company that just gives you a fantastic product for free? Like, how would you even twist yourself into finding complaints? And really what I learned is I just grossly underestimated humans' capacity for complaints. And so people can be getting a great product for free, and yet they say, well, but like there's something wrong with the search with the search order ranking or whatever. So I'm mad, or I'm mad because I don't like the way that they're treating the workers or whatever. It's like, my God, some people are hard to please. like, just the sheer chutzpah of complaining about Google. It's like you don't, and they haven't, no one even claims that Google is going to start charging $1 a search or something like that. And I think people realize, if they did that, that would destroy Google. So with this point to still be whining, it's like, oh, my privacy. Yeah, like how much would you really pay to go and have your privacy protected? If Google offered premium Google, where we don't sell your data, but you have to pay us $20 a month, how much fair a share of people would actually pay that? It's like 1%, 0.1%. So really, this was finding the pettiest complaints to try to avoid being happy about things, which is a bizarre thing. Like in a lot of the courses, I don't want to go and give any thank you to business, those greedy jerks. They're making money. Well, they didn't make any money off of you. They just helped you. So why aren't you grateful? Why should I be grateful to them? Come on. Right. So this really is a case of pathological ingratitude. Get over it.
The book is Pro Market and Pro Business Essays on Laissez Faire. Check the Amazon description in the link below. Dr. Caplan, thank you so much for your time.
Great pleasure to talk to you as always, Keith. Bye-bye.